My name is Aaliyah, and at 28 years old, I own the most exclusive lifestyle management firm in Atlanta. But to my family, I am just the failure who wipes their floors. Tomorrow is Thanksgiving, and my mother Beatrice just told me I am not allowed to eat at the table because I might embarrass my brother-in-law Preston. She handed me a mop and said, "Just watch the kids while we celebrate." What she does not know is that I just bought the mortgage on her house. By the time dessert is served, this will be their last celebration in this home. Before I tell you how I evicted my entire toxic family in one night, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep who became the wolf. The rain in Atlanta does not wash away sins, it just makes the mud deeper. I stepped off the city bus 3 blocks away from my childhood home, pulling my oversized thrift store coat tighter around me. The wind whipped against my face, but I did not flinch. I was used to the cold, especially the kind that came from my own blood relatives. I walked the rest of the way to the sprawling colonial estate on Magnolia Lane, my sneakers squelching with every step. This house was the pride and joy of my mother, Mama Beatrice, a woman who spent every Sunday in the front pew of church and every other day judging anyone with less money than her. As I reached the heavy oak double doors, I took a deep breath. In my bag, I carried a bottle of Screaming Eagle Cabernet 1992, a vintage wine worth $10,000. It was a peace offering, a test to see if they could look past my appearance to the value I brought. I rang the bell. The door swung open, and Mama Beatrice stood there, looming like a gatekeeper to a kingdom I was unworthy of entering. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe, lingering with disgust on my muddy sneakers. "Stop right there!" she barked, holding up a hand manicured with French tips. "Do not take another step, Aaliyah. Look at you. You are soaking wet and filthy. Were you planning on tracking mud all over my Persian rugs? I just had them professionally cleaned for Preston and his business partners." I looked down at my shoes, then back at her. "Hello to you too, Mama." The storm caught me walking from the bus stop. I brought something for the dinner. I held out the heavy gift bag protecting the wine inside. Beatrice snatched it from my hand, not with gratitude, but with the same disdain one might use to pick up a dead rodent. She peered inside, her nose wrinkling, as if she smelled something rotting. "What is this garbage?" "Some leftover grape juice from that catering job you lied about having." "We are serving real wine tonight, Aaliyah, imported from Italy by Preston himself. We do not need your charity scraps." Before I could explain that the bottle in her hand cost more than the dress she was wearing, she tossed the bag into the corner of the foyer. It landed with a dull thud, and I prayed the glass had not shattered. "You are not coming in through the front door," she announced, pointing a long finger toward the side of the house. "Go around to the servants' entrance in the kitchen. And take off those shoes before you step on my tile. I do not want Preston to see his sister-in-law looking like a drowned rat. It ruins the aesthetic." I clenched my jaw, my fingernails digging into my palms inside my pockets. This was the welcome I traveled across the city for. But I did not argue. Not yet. I simply nodded, picked up my $10,000 bottle of wine from the floor, and turned back into the rain, walking toward the back door like I had done 1,000 times before. Tonight, I was the servant. But tomorrow, I would be the landlord. I walked through the back door, and the warm scent of rosemary and roasted turkey hit me instantly, but it did not feel like home. It felt like walking into a restaurant where I was the dishwasher. I shook off my wet coat and hung it on the hook designated for staff, my eyes adjusting to the bright lights of the gourmet kitchen. Before I could even wipe the rain from my face, I heard the click-clack of high heels approaching. Bianca, my older sister, swept into the room like a hurricane wrapped in silk. At 32, she was stunning with flawless skin and hair that cost more to maintain than my monthly rent, but her beauty was only skin deep. Without a word of greeting, she threw a garment bag at me. It hit me square in the chest, knocking the breath out of me. "Iron this," she commanded, not even looking at me as she checked her reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator door. "And be careful, Aaliyah. That is a vintage Versace gown. Preston bought it for me in Milan. If you burn it like you did that shirt last Christmas, do not bother coming back upstairs. I unzipped the bag, revealing a dress of shimmering black fabric, delicate and expensive. It was beautiful, the kind of dress I used to dream of wearing. I will take care of it, Bianca. I said, my voice steady despite the exhaustion seeping into my bones. I need the steamer, though. The iron is too harsh for this fabric. Bianca rolled her eyes, turning to face me with a sneer that twisted her perfect features. Of course you would know about fabrics. That is all you are good for, right? Laundry and cleaning. God, look at you, Aaliyah. You look like you aged 10 years since Thanksgiving. Those bags under your eyes are bigger than your future. I touched my face instinctively. I had been working 20-hour days building my empire, but to her, it just looked like poverty. You know it is a shame, Bianca continued, circling me like a shark. You actually had potential once. Remember when that scout approached you at the mall when you were 16? Mom was so worried you would get an ego. Good thing she put a stop to that nonsense. Modeling requires discipline and beauty, neither of which you seem to have kept. I stayed silent, smoothing the fabric of her dress. I remembered that day perfectly. I remembered the hope, the excitement, and then the crushing reality when Mama Beatrice told me I had to decline the contract. Not because I lacked potential, but because Bianca had maxed out the family credit cards on a nose job and breast implants, and someone had to work double shifts at the diner to pay off the debt collectors. That someone was me. I gave up my dreams so you could buy yours, I wanted to scream. Instead, I just nodded. I will have the dress ready in 20 minutes. Bianca laughed, a harsh sound that grated on my nerves. Good. And try to do something with your hair before the guests arrive. You look like a witch. Honestly, it is embarrassing to introduce you as my sister. Sometimes I wonder if we are even related. She turned on her heel and strutted out, leaving me alone with the expensive dress and the ghosts of the life I sacrificed for her vanity. I plugged in the steamer, the hiss of the machine matching the simmering anger in my chest. She thought I was ugly. She thought I was old. But she did not know that the woman standing in her kitchen wearing thrift store clothes and exhausted eyes was the same woman who held the deed to the roof over her head. The aroma of roasted garlic and rosemary prime rib filled the dining room, making my empty stomach clench in protest. I had been working since dawn, scrubbing floors and steaming dresses without so much as a cup of coffee. I wiped my hands on my jeans and approached the long mahogany table where my family was already seated. There was one empty chair near the end next to Coco, who was busy taking selfies with a crystal wine glass. I reached out to pull the chair back, just wanting 5 minutes to rest my aching feet. Suddenly, a heavy Italian leather loafer slammed down onto the velvet seat cushion, blocking my path. I looked up to see Preston leaning back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips as he swirled his expensive scotch. "Sorry, Aaliyah," he drawled, his voice dripping with condescension. "I think you are confused. This seating arrangement is strictly for people who matter. You know, earners. That chair has a prerequisite of a 6-figure income minimum. Last I checked, your bank account is about 5 zeros short." Bianca giggled, covering her mouth with a napkin. "Oh, babe, stop it. You are going to make her cry. She probably thinks net worth is something you use to catch butterflies." The table erupted in laughter. I stood there frozen, my hands still gripping the back of the chair. I looked at Mama Beatrice at the head of the table. She was slicing the prime rib, the juices running red onto the platter. "Mama," I said quietly, "I just want to eat lunch." Beatrice did not even look up from the meat. She waved her knife dismissively in my direction. "Do not look at me with those puppy dog eyes, Aaliyah. Preston is right. You do not fit in at this table. We have important business to discuss regarding the estate transfer and future investments. These are adult conversations that do not concern the help. Besides, look at you. You are a mess." She pointed the knife toward the kitchen door. "Grab a plate and eat standing up at the counter. When you are done, I want you down in the basement. Preston's investors are arriving at 5 o'clock, and I will not have you moping around the living room looking like a charity case. You depress the property value just by standing there. Stay out of sight until I call for you." I swallowed the lump in my throat and walked over to the buffet server. The prime rib looked perfect pink and tender. Beside it were truffle mashed potatoes and glazed carrots. I reached for the serving spoon, my hand trembling slightly from hunger. Mama Beatrice slapped my hand away with a wet towel she used to wipe the table. The snap of the fabric echoed in the room. "Not the steak," she hissed. "Are you crazy? That is Wagyu beef imported specially for Preston. It is $50 a pound. Do not waste it on your peasant palate. There is some stale baguette left over from breakfast in the bread bin, and I think there is a can of generic tuna in the pantry. That is plenty for you. Maybe if you worked harder you could afford steak, but until then, you eat what you are worth." I watched them, Preston cutting into a piece of meat that cost more than my weekly grocery budget, Bianca sneaking a piece of the prime rib to her purebred poodle under the table. The dog ate better than I did, Coco complaining that the sparkling water was room temperature, and me holding a heel of dry bread that was hard as a rock. I took the bread. I did not scream. I did not flip the table. I simply looked at Preston's shoe still resting on the chair that was denied to me. He thought he was displaying dominance. He thought he was keeping me in my place. He had no idea he was kicking a sleeping lion. I took a bite of the dry crust, and it tasted like ash, but I swallowed it anyway. It was fuel. Fuel for the fire that was going to burn this entire house of cards to the ground. "Enjoy your lunch, Preston," I thought as I turned toward the basement door. "It is the last meal you will ever eat in a house you do not own." I walked down the narrow, splintered staircase into the basement. The air grew colder with every step, heavy with the scent of damp earth and old cardboard. This was my designated place. Not the guest room, not even the kitchen, but the underground storage where we kept things that were broken or forgotten. Mama Beatrice had made it clear. Out of sight, out of mind. I found an old wooden stool in the corner, one with a wobbly leg, and sat down. Above me, the floorboards creaked as my family moved around preparing to entertain the elite of Atlanta. I could hear the muffled sounds of their excitement, the sharp click of Bianca's heels, and the booming laugh of Preston. They were living in a fantasy world, built on credit cards and lies, while I sat in the dark, listening to the foundation rot. I stood up and walked over to the small rectangular window set high in the concrete wall. It was ground level on the outside, barely large enough to let in a sliver of gray afternoon light. Through the grime on the glass, I watched as the gravel driveway began to fill up. A sleek black Mercedes pulled in, followed by a silver Porsche and a vintage Jaguar. Preston's investors had arrived. They stepped out of their cars, adjusting expensive suits and checking Rolex watches, unaware that the man they were coming to see was drowning in debt and moral bankruptcy. They looked at the house with admiration, seeing the fresh coat of paint and the manicured lawn. They did not know the roof was leaking. They did not know the taxes had not been paid in 3 years. They saw the illusion my mother had spent her life perfecting. I turned away from the window and reached into the deep inner pocket of my oversized coat. My family thought I wore these baggy clothes because I was poor and had no style. They thought I carried a cracked prepaid phone because I could not afford better. They were wrong. My hand closed around cool heavy metal. I pulled it out. It was a Virtu signature Cobra. Gold plating, emerald eyes on the snake design, a phone worth $360,000. It was a ridiculous extravagance, but in my line of work, image was everything, and privacy was priceless. I unlocked the screen and dialed a number that was encrypted on a private server. It rang once. A crisp, professional voice answered immediately. "Good evening, Miss Jenkins. Is everything proceeding as planned?" I looked up at the ceiling where the sound of Preston proposing a toast drifted down through the floorboards. "No, Sarah," I said, my voice dropping an octave, shedding the timid rasp of the servant girl. "We are accelerating the timeline. I want you to contact the county clerk's office immediately. Purchase the tax lien certificate for this property. Yes, 45 Magnolia Lane. Do it now before the dinner service begins. And while you are at it, freeze the assets we discussed regarding Preston's offshore accounts. I want his cards to decline before he orders dessert." "Understood, Miss Jenkins." The transaction will be completed in 5 minutes. Anything else? No, that will be all. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. In the dim light of the basement, a cold smile spread across my face. I looked at my reflection in the dusty glass of an old cabinet. My eyes were not red from crying anymore. They were sharp, clear, and dangerous. They thought they had buried me down here in the dark. They forgot that a seed needs dirt and darkness to grow. I was not hiding. I was waiting. And when I came up those stairs, I was going to bring the whole house down with me. I had barely slipped the phone back into my pocket when the heavy door at the top of the stairs banged open against the wall. The sound of thundering footsteps echoed like a stampede as Bianca's children, Jaden and Mia, burst into the basement. At 7 and 5 years old, they were dressed in miniature designer outfits that cost more than my car, but their behavior was feral. They had been raised to see people like me not as relatives, but as furniture objects to be used and abused for their amusement. "Look!" Jaden shouted, pointing a sticky finger directly at my face. "It is the ugly maid!" He laughed, a cruel, high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves. Mia giggled and hurled a hard plastic action figure at me with surprising force. It struck my shoulder with a sharp sting, bouncing off onto the dirty concrete floor. "Fetch that ugly maid," Jaden commanded, kicking a half-eaten apple core toward my feet. "Do it now, or I will tell Mommy you hit me." Something inside me snapped. I had tolerated their disrespect for years, excusing it as the innocence of childhood. But this was not innocence. This was learned cruelty. I stood up to my full height, my posture shifting from the downtrodden ant to the CEO who managed multi-million-dollar assets. "That is enough," I said, my voice low and authoritative, cutting through their laughter like a knife. "Pick that up, Jaden. Right now, and do not ever call me that again. I am your aunt, not your servant. You will show respect in this house or you will leave." The children froze. They had never heard me speak like that. Their eyes went wide and Mia's lower lip began to tremble as the shock of being disciplined for the first time in her life set in. For a second, silence hung in the damp air. Then I heard the sharp, aggressive click of heels on the wooden stairs. Bianca descended into the basement like a storm cloud wrapped in black silk. She took in the scene instantly, her children looking fearful, me standing tall and defiant. She did not ask what happened. She did not look at the trash her children had thrown. She crossed the room in 2 long strides, and before I could even blink, her hand connected with my cheek. The slap was loud and sharp, stinging my skin and ringing in my ears. My head snapped to the side from the force of it. "How dare you!" Bianca hissed, her face contorted with a mixture of rage and disgust. "How dare you raise your voice at my children? Who do you think you are, Aaliyah? You are nothing. You are here because we allow you to be here. You exist in this house on our charity." I touched my cheek, my skin burning hot. "They were throwing things at me, Bianca. They called me names." "I do not care if they set you on fire," Bianca screamed, getting right in my face. "You do not discipline them. You are the help, Aaliyah. Know your place. If I ever hear you speak to them like that again, if you ever make my babies cry even for a second, I will throw you out of this house so fast your head will spin. You will be on the street with nothing. Do you understand me? Permanent eviction. No family, no shelter. Gone." She turned to her children, her voice instantly transforming into a syrupy coo. "Come on, my angels. Let us go upstairs away from the mean witch." She grabbed their hands and led them up the stairs, leaving me alone in the damp silence, my cheek throbbing with the imprint of her hand. She thought she had put me in my place. She did not realize she had just signed her own eviction notice. I touched the spot where she hit me, and the cold resolve in my gut hardened into diamond. That was the last time anyone in this family would ever lay a hand on me. The heavy oak door at the top of the stairs creaked open again, breaking the silence Bianca had left behind. I expected Mama Beatrice coming to scold me for upsetting her precious grandchildren, but instead, heavy, expensive leather soles hit the wooden steps. It was Preston. He descended into the basement like a king entering a dungeon, adjusting his silk tie, as he looked around with a sneer of absolute disgust. The dim light cast shadows across his face, but it could not hide the look in his eyes as they landed on me. It was a look I had seen before, a stomach-churning mixture of contempt and a greasy, predatory kind of lust that made my skin crawl. He looked at me like I was a piece of meat he found in the garbage, something repulsive but still available for consumption. "Well, well, Aaliyah," he drawled, stepping closer, his cologne overpowering the smell of damp earth. "You really do fit in down here. You know I always told Bianca you were the wild one. A shame you let yourself go like this. You could have been useful." I took a step back, pressing myself against the cold concrete wall. "What do you want, Preston?" He laughed, a low, humorless sound. "Wine, obviously. Your mother said there was a vintage bottle down here. 1998. But first he stopped and looked down at his pristine Italian loafers. He grimaced, lifting one foot and placing it heavily on the wobbly stool I had been sitting on. "This basement is filthy. The dust down here has ruined the shine on my shoes. Clean them." I stared at him, unable to believe his audacity. He pointed a manicured finger at the rag hanging from my pocket. "You heard me. Get on your knees and clean my shoes. You are already dressed for it." "No," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I am not cleaning your shoes, Preston." His eyes narrowed. The playful cruelty vanished, replaced by cold malice. "You think because Bianca is not here you can have an attitude. You are a guest in my future house, Aaliyah. You do what I say." He looked around and saw the bucket of gray, soapy water I had used to scrub the floor earlier. Without breaking eye contact, he pulled his leg back and kicked the bucket with sudden, violent force. The plastic bucket slammed into my shins and tipped over, sending a wave of cold, dirty water splashing over my legs and soaking into my already damp sneakers. I gasped, jumping back, but it was too late. The water seeped into my socks, chilling me to the bone. "Oops," Preston said with a mock pout. "Look at that. Now you are wet and dirty. You might as well clean the floor while you are down there. But first, get me that wine. The 1998 Cabernet. And do not drop it. That bottle is worth more than your life." I stood there, shivering, the dirty water dripping from my jeans. I watched him turn his back to examine the dusty wine rack, his arrogance radiating off him in waves. He had no idea. He had absolutely no idea that the 1998 Cabernet he was demanding was a bottle I had purchased at a private auction in Napa Valley 6 months ago. I had sent it to Mama Beatrice anonymously, as a peace offering, a gift she had tossed in the cellar without a second thought. I walked over to the rack, my wet shoes squelching on the concrete. I found the bottle. The label was dusty but intact. I held it in my hands, feeling the weight of the glass. It was heavy enough to break a skull, but I had a better use for it. I was going to let him drink it. I was going to let him taste the luxury he thought he deserved, right before I took everything away from him. "Here, Preston," I said, keeping my head down, handing him the bottle. He snatched it from my hands, his fingers brushing mine. I pulled away instantly, wiping my hand on my coat. "Good girl," he sneered, inspecting the label. "See, was that so hard? Learn your place, Aaliyah, and maybe I will let you stay in the guest room instead of the basement when I take over this house." He turned and walked back up the stairs, whistling a tune, leaving me standing in a puddle of dirty water with a heart full of cold, calculating fire. I handed the heavy bottle to Preston, my hands steady, despite the cold, dirty water soaking into my socks. He grabbed it by the neck like it was a cheap beer, his other hand digging into his pocket for a corkscrew. He pulled out a jagged multi-tool, the kind people keep in their car for emergencies, and jammed the metal spiral against the center of the cork with brute force, ready to twist it apart. "Stop," I said, my voice cutting through the damp air, sharp and commanding. "Do not piece that cork with a serrated edge. That is a 1998 Screaming Eagle. It has been aging on its side for over 2 decades. The cork is fragile. You need an Osso opener, or you need to angle the worm gently to avoid pushing sediment back into the neck. You are about to ruin a $5,000 bottle of wine before you even take a sip." Preston froze, the metal tool hovering millimeters from the cork. He looked up at me, his eyes narrowing into slits of amusement and disbelief. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "Excuse me, did the maid just give me a lesson on sommelier etiquette? You talk like you have ever tasted anything other than boxed wine and tap water. What would a gutter rat like you know about a $5,000 bottle? You probably think Boone's Farm is high class." He laughed, shaking his head as if I had told a particularly funny joke. "Stick to mopping, Aaliyah. Leave the appreciation of fine things to people who can actually afford them." I did not flinch. I stared right into his watery blue eyes and let the mask slip just a fraction. "It is a '98 Cabernet Sauvignon from Oakville, Preston. It was a challenging vintage due to the El Niño rains that year, which resulted in a lower yield but a higher concentration of fruit. It has notes of creme de cassis charcoal and spring flowers. It requires at least 45 minutes of decanting to open up properly, otherwise the tannins will be too aggressive on the palate. And considering you are about to serve it to a man worth $300 million, I suggest you treat it with a little more respect than you treat your wife." The silence that followed was heavy and thick. Preston blinked, his smile faltering for a split second. He looked from me to the bottle in his hand, his grip tightening until his knuckles turned white. For a moment, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes, a shadow of unease, as if he were looking at a stranger he had underestimated. He looked at the label again, checking the year, checking the vineyard, as if verifying my words against what he saw. Then the arrogance slammed back into place like a steel door. He scoffed, rolling his eyes and turning away from me. "You must have read that on the back of the bottle while you were dusting down here. Good job memorizing big words. Maybe you can use them to impress the rats." He shoved the corkscrew into the cork with deliberate, violent force, twisting it aggressively just to spite me. "Get out of my face before I decide you are too annoying to keep around even as free labor." He marched up the stairs, the bottle clutched in his hand, leaving me standing in the shadows with a satisfied smirk. He had no idea he was holding the evidence of his own ignorance. The front door slammed open, and a cloud of cloying perfume filled the hallway, announcing the arrival of Coco, my youngest sister. She swept in wearing a hot pink blazer and oversized sunglasses, looking every inch the high-powered attorney she pretended to be. On her arm swung a handbag with a massive designer logo that caught the light in a way that screamed counterfeit to anyone who knew luxury goods. I knew for a fact she bought it from a trunk in a parking lot because I had seen the transaction on the security feed of the mall parking lot I owned, but to our mother, Coco was the height of sophistication. "I am absolutely drained," she announced, throwing her car keys onto the table I had just polished. "Professor Miller kept me after class for 45 minutes. He said my arguments on tort reform were revolutionary. He practically begged me to join his firm as a junior partner before I even graduate. Harvard is exhausting when you are the smartest person in the room." I stood in the shadows, holding my mop, biting my tongue. I had the expulsion letter from Harvard in my safe. She had been kicked out 4 months ago for hiring someone to take her exams. She was not debating tort reform. She was likely dodging the bookies she owed money to. She spotted me and her expression soured instantly. "Oh, good, the help is here. Aaliyah, come here. I need cash for the taxi. My card reader is acting up and the driver is waiting." "I thought you drove," I said, keeping my voice flat. "My car is in the shop. Engine trouble. Now hurry up. I need $20 for the tip. Do not be stingy." I tightened my grip on the mop handle. "I do not have any cash, Coco. I spent my last few dollars on the bus fare to get here." She rolled her eyes, letting out a dramatic huff of annoyance. "You are such a liar. I know you hide money. You always have a little stash from your cleaning gigs. Stop holding out on family. It is ugly." Before I could react, she lunged for my worn canvas tote bag sitting on the bench. She upended it, dumping my personal belongings onto the floor. A hairbrush, a bottle of water, and a small white envelope tumbled out. It contained $200 in cash, the money I had withdrawn to pay for the private investigator who was tracking her debts. "Aha!" she shrieked, snatching the envelope from the floor. $200. And you said you were broke. You are a selfish, lying hoarder, Aaliyah. I am taking this. Consider it rent for breathing my air. Coco, no. I stepped forward, reaching for her hand. That is not yours. Give it back. She danced out of reach, laughing cruelly. Finders keepers. Maybe if you get a real job, you will not have to cry over pocket change. I grabbed her arm, desperate to get the envelope back, not for the money, but for the principle. Give it to me, Coco. She snarled, her face twisting into a mask of spoiled rage. Get your dirty hands off me. She yanked her arm back with violent force. Her long acrylic nails caught the fabric of my old cotton blouse at the shoulder. There was a loud tearing sound as the sleeve ripped completely away from the seam, leaving my arm exposed and stinging from a long red scratch. She stumbled back, clutching the money to her chest, looking at my torn shirt with a smirk. Look what you did, she said, adjusting her fake bag. You ruined your own clothes over a couple of bucks. You look like a beggar now. Get out of my face before I tell Mama you tried to mug me. She turned and strutted out the door to pay the taxi, leaving me standing there with a torn shirt and a heart that had finally turned to stone. She thought she was stealing from a pauper. She did not know she had just robbed her executioner. Coco let out a blood-curdling scream that vibrated through the floorboards. She threw herself backward onto the hardwood floor, with the theatrical timing of a seasoned actress knocking over a vase of dried flowers as she went. "Help me!" she shrieked, clutching her arm and squeezing her eyes shut to force out tears. She attacked me. Aaliyah is crazy. She tried to steal my tuition money, and when I caught her, she hit me. Mama, help me, she is hurting me. I stood frozen, my hands still raised in a defensive posture, staring down at my sister, who was writhing on the ground like she had been shot. Before I could even lower my arms or open my mouth to speak, the sound of heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway. Mama Beatrice burst into the room, her eyes wide with panic that instantly hardened into rage the moment they landed on me. She did not ask a single question. She did not look for bruises on Coco or check the torn sleeve of my shirt. She saw her golden child on the floor and her scapegoat standing over her, and the verdict was delivered instantly in her mind. Beatrice grabbed a heavy straw broom that was leaning against the wall near the pantry. She crossed the distance between us in 2 strides and swung it with all her strength. The wooden handle connected with my arm with a sickening crack, sending a jolt of pain shooting up to my shoulder. I gasped, stumbling back, but she did not stop. She swung again, striking my leg and driving me toward the corner of the room. "You animal!" she screamed, her face contorted and ugly with hate. "You jealous, spiteful creature! How dare you touch her? You are sick with envy because she is going to be a lawyer and you are nothing but a servant. I took you in when you had nothing, and this is how you repay me, by assaulting your own sister in my house." "I did not touch her," I said, my voice shaking, but loud enough to cut through her screaming. "She stole my money, Mama. She is lying to you. She is always lying." "Shut your mouth," Beatrice shouted, raising the broom again. "Do not you dare speak ill of her. Coco is an angel. You are the rot in this family. Get on your knees." I stared at her, my breath catching in my throat. "What did you say?" "I said get on your knees," Beatrice hissed, pointing a manicured finger at the floor, right next to where Coco lay smirking behind her hands. "Get on your knees and apologize to your sister. Beg her for forgiveness for raising your dirty hands against her. Do it now, Aaliyah, or so help me God. I will have the police here to drag you out in handcuffs." The room went deadly silent. Even Coco stopped her fake whimpering to watch, waiting for my submission. They wanted me to break. They wanted to see me crumble to accept the shame they were trying to force onto me. They wanted the old Aaliyah, the one who would do anything for a scrap of their love. But that woman was dead. She died the moment that broom handle hit my skin. I slowly straightened my spine, ignoring the throbbing in my arm and the burning in my eyes. I stood to my full height, which was taller than both of them, and looked my mother directly in the face. I did not blink. I did not look away. I let her see the fire that had replaced the fear in my eyes. "I will not kneel," I said, my voice low and steady. carrying the weight of a final judgment, and I will not apologize for a crime I did not commit. But remember this moment, Mama. Look at me, and remember exactly what you just did. Because I promise you, on everything I own, you are going to regret that hit for the rest of your life. The silence in the kitchen was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own shallow breathing. My arm throbbed where the broom had struck me, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the cold calculation forming in my mind. Just as Mama Beatrice turned her back to check the oven, the silence was shattered by a harsh vibration. Coco's phone buzzed violently on the granite countertop. The screen lit up with a blinding white glow, and since I was standing right next to it picking up the trash she had thrown, I saw the message clearly. It was from a contact saved only as Big T. The preview read, "You have until midnight, princess, or we take a finger." My blood ran cold. I knew that name. I knew exactly who Big T was. 3 months ago, one of my clients, a platinum-selling rapper, had gotten himself into a similar mess with a high-stakes underground poker ring in Atlanta, run by Terrence Big T Williams. It had taken me 3 sleepless nights, 2 favors from the police commissioner, and a wire transfer of $50,000 to clean up that disaster without the press finding out. Big T was not a college bookie or a credit card company. He was a man who broke bones for a living, and he did not make idle threats. Coco snatched the phone up, her face draining of all color. She looked at Mama Beatrice, who was busy basting the turkey, and then at me with a flash of panic. She quickly tried to hide beneath a mask of annoyance. "I need to take this," she stammered, backing toward the butler's pantry. "It is my study group. Finals are coming up, and we are coordinating notes for the tort law exam." "Go ahead, honey," Mama said, her voice dripping with that sickening sweetness she reserved only for Coco. "You work so hard. Do not let us disturb your genius. Tell your friends hello for me." Coco slipped into the pantry and pulled the door almost shut, leaving just a sliver of darkness. She did not know that in my line of work, silence was a weapon I had mastered years ago. I moved across the kitchen, my steps soundless on the tile. I did not look like a threat in my torn shirt and messy hair, but I was the most dangerous thing in the house. I slid my phone out of my pocket and pressed record, holding it near the gap in the door. "Please listen, T," she hissed, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and ruthless entitlement. "I told you I am good for it. You do not need to send anyone here. My family is having a dinner. There are rich people here." There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke, and I could hear Coco's breathing hitch. "I know the deadline," she whispered fiercely, "but the plan is happening tonight. The old lady is going to sign the house over to my brother-in-law. He is going to sell it and cut me in. I will have your 20 grand by Monday morning. Just back off." She is stupid, T. She thinks I am paying tuition. She will sign whatever we put in front of her. I ended the recording and slipped the phone back into my pocket. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear but from the sheer magnitude of the betrayal I had just witnessed. Coco was not just a spoiled brat. She was a predator willing to feed our mother to the wolves to save her own skin. She was promising money from the sale of a house she did not own to pay off a debt she had lied about. I looked at the pantry door one last time. "You just dug your own grave, little sister," I thought. "And I am going to be the one to push you in." The heavy oak front door swung open and closed in a rhythmic cadence, admitting a steady stream of Atlanta's elite. The foyer filled with the murmur of polite conversation, the clinking of expensive jewelry, and the overwhelming scent of designer perfumes that tried to mask the rot at the core of this family. I stood near the kitchen island, watching the transformation through the crack in the swinging door. Men in tailored suits shook hands with Preston, who was playing the role of the benevolent lord of the manor, while Bianca floated between them, laughing too loudly, her desperation to belong evident in every forced smile. Mama Beatrice bustled into the kitchen, her face flushed with the adrenaline of social climbing. She took one look at me in my torn shirt and stained jeans, and her expression curdled. You cannot go out there looking like a street rat, she hissed. I will not have you shaming me in front of the Sterlings and the Vanderbilts. She reached into a lower cabinet and pulled out a wad of gray fabric, throwing it at my chest. Put this on. It is an old catering uniform from when your aunt worked at the convention center. It is 3 sizes too big, but it will cover up your disgrace. I unfolded the garment. It was a shapeless, gray polyester dress, faded and smelling of mothballs. It was the ultimate symbol of my status in this house. A uniform designed to make the wearer invisible. I did not argue. I simply stepped into the butler's pantry and pulled the scratchy fabric over my head. When I emerged, Beatrice nodded with grim satisfaction. Better, she said. Now you look like what you are. Useful but forgettable. She held out her hand, palm open. Give me your phone. I stared at her. Excuse me. Your phone, Aaliyah, she demanded, snapping her fingers. I know you. You will spend the whole night texting your low-life friends or taking pictures to post online, pretending you are part of this party. I want your full attention on serving my guests. Hand it over. My heart skipped a beat. My Virtu phone with its encrypted connection to my banking empire and my security team was in my right pocket. If she saw it, the game was over. She would know I had money, she would know I was lying, and she would never sign those papers. I reached into my left pocket, where I kept my burner phone. It was an old, cracked Android with a dead battery that I used specifically for moments like this. I pulled it out, feigning reluctance. Mama, please, I need it in case of an emergency. She snatched it from my hand and tossed it into the junk drawer, locking it with a key she kept in her apron. The only emergency you have is running out of ice, she retorted. You will get this back when the last guest leaves and the dishes are done. She grabbed my shoulders and turned me toward the dining room door, her grip bruising. Listen to me, Aaliyah. Tonight you are not my daughter. You are not Bianca's sister. You are the help. You stand in the darkest corner of the room. You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not make eye contact with the guests. You refill glasses and you clear plates. If I see you trying to socialize, if I see you trying to act like you belong, I will throw you out on the street before you can blink. Do you understand me? I looked down at the floor, effectively hiding the spark of triumph in my eyes. Yes, Mama, I whispered. I understand perfectly. Good. Now get out there. The ice bucket is empty. I pushed through the swinging door, walking into the lion's den with a tray in my hand and a plan in my heart. She wanted me to be invisible. She wanted me to be a ghost. She had no idea that ghosts were the things that came back to haunt you. The dining room was a sea of expensive suits and polite laughter, but the energy shifted instantly when the heavy oak doors swung open to admit a silver-haired man with a presence that commanded the room. It was Mr. Sterling. He was not just rich. He was old money Atlanta, the kind of wealth that whispered instead of shouted. He walked with a cane not because he needed it, but because it added to his aura of absolute authority. Preston practically tripped over his own feet, rushing to greet him, his face flushing with eager desperation. Mr. Sterling, what an honor. Thank you so much for coming. Please let me take your coat. Can I get you a drink? We have a 1998 Cabernet that is simply exquisite. Sterling handed over his coat without a word, his eyes scanning the room with the detached appraisal of a man deciding whether to buy a company or shut it down. His gaze lingered for a fraction of a second on the peeling paint near the ceiling cornice, a detail Mama Beatrice had tried to hide with strategic lighting. Thank you, Preston, Sterling said, his voice deep and gravelly. I must admit I was curious. You promised me an investment opportunity unlike any other. Preston beamed, guiding Sterling toward the center of the room like a prize show dog. Absolutely, sir. And you are standing in it. This estate is a historic gem. My mother-in-law has agreed to transfer the deed to my holding company next week. We are planning a complete renovation luxury condos while preserving the historic facade. It is a gold mine, Mr. Sterling. Low acquisition cost, high yield. I just need a partner with vision to help with the initial capital. I watched from the shadows of the butler's pantry, my hands gripping a silver tray so hard my knuckles turned white. I knew exactly what Preston was doing. He was selling a dream he did not own. The deed transfer was not finalized. The zoning permits for condos would never be approved in this historic district. And the low acquisition cost he mentioned was actually zero, because he was planning to steal the house from Mama Beatrice and leave her destitute. He was running a classic Ponzi scheme, using the house as bait to get Sterling's money to pay off his other debts. I had seen the paperwork on his desk when I was cleaning his office 2 weeks ago. Fake projections, forged signatures, and a trail of lies that led straight to prison. "Let me give you the tour," Preston said, placing a hand on Sterling's shoulder with a familiarity that made the older man stiffen. "The architecture is stunning, original crown molding hardwood floors from the 1800s. Of course it needs some work, but that is where you come in." Sterling nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Interesting. And your mother-in-law, she is on board with being displaced?" "Oh, completely." Preston lied smoothly. "She is eager to downsize. We found her a lovely retirement community. Very upscale. She wants us to maximize the value of the asset. It is what her late husband would have wanted." Liar. I thought, my heart pounding against my ribs. Mama Beatrice thought she was getting a penthouse, not a room in a state-run facility. Preston was not just a thief. He was a vulture picking the bones of his own family while smiling for the camera. I watched them walk toward the library, Preston gesturing wildly, Sterling listening with a shark-like intensity. They did not know the real owner was standing 10 feet away, holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The swinging door to the kitchen burst open, revealing a scene of absolute catastrophe. The head chef, a man named Andre, whom Mama Beatrice had paid a deposit equal to my rent, was hunched over the sink, retching violently. His face was a pale shade of green that matched the walls of the servants' quarters. Within seconds, he was being escorted out the back door by his panicked sous chef, leaving the kitchen silent and the stoves cold. Mama Beatrice stood in the center of the room, her hands clutching her pearl necklace, as if she were trying to strangle herself. "The guests are seating," she whispered, her voice trembling with the first genuine fear I had seen all day. "We have no food. Preston will kill me. Mr. Sterling will leave. We are ruined." Then her eyes locked onto me. I was standing by the sink washing crystal glasses, but in her desperate gaze I saw a solution. "You," she barked, pointing a shaking finger. "You cook." "Me?" I asked, keeping my face blank. "Mama, I am just the maid, remember. I do not know how to cook gourmet food. Do not play dumb with me, Aaliyah," she hissed, grabbing my arm and dragging me toward the prep station. "I have seen you make grilled cheese. Cooking is cooking. Just heat it up and put it on a plate. You have 1 hour before the main course needs to be served. If you embarrass me, I swear I will throw your clothes on the lawn and burn them." She stormed out to stall the guests, leaving me alone with 20 pounds of raw Wagyu beef and a crate of live lobsters. She thought she was setting me up for failure. She thought I would burn the meat and serve rubbery seafood. She had no idea who I really was. I took a deep breath and tied the apron tighter. I did not learn to cook from making grilled cheese. I learned from Chef Jean-Luc, the 3-star Michelin genius I hired to run the kitchen at my private club in Dubai. I learned how to clarify butter while discussing quarterly earnings. I learned the precise temperature to poach lobster while negotiating hostile takeovers. I moved. It was not frantic, it was a dance of efficiency. I cranked the heat on the burners and grabbed the Japanese steel knives. I broke down the lobsters in seconds, extracting the meat without wasting a gram. I seared the Wagyu in cast iron, basting it with thyme and garlic until the crust was a perfect mahogany, while the inside remained a tender ruby red. I whipped up a beurre blanc sauce, balancing the acidity of the lemon with the richness of the butter, tasting it with a silver spoon like a judge. The kitchen transformed from a disaster zone into a high-performance culinary theater. I was plating the appetizer, a seared scallop with cauliflower puree and caviar, when the door pushed open. Bianca and Mama Beatrice stood there, their mouths hanging open. They stared at the perfect plates, the intricate garnish, the steam rising from the pots in a synchronized ballet. "I thought you said she was useless," Bianca whispered, staring at the food like it was an alien artifact. "That looks like something from a magazine." Mama Beatrice recovered first, sniffing the air with a haughty disdain that masked her relief. Well, obviously, she picked up a few tricks working in those greasy diners she frequents. Manual labor is all she is good for. It is muscle memory, Bianca, not intelligence. She is just a pair of hands. She grabbed two plates, shoving them toward the dining room door. "Hurry up, Aaliyah. Do not let it get cold, and wipe that smudge off your face. You look like you have been working in a coal mine." I watched them take credit for my work, my art, and felt a cold smile touch my lips. "Eat up, family. Enjoy the meal. It is the last time you will ever taste success." The dining room hummed with the sound of silver forks scraping against fine china and the murmur of satisfied conversation. The first course had been a triumph. The seared scallops were gone, their delicate flavor praised by every guest at the table. Even Mr. Sterling, who was notoriously hard to please, had wiped his plate clean with a piece of crusty bread. "This is extraordinary," Beatrice Sterling said, leaning back in his chair. "I must confess I did not expect such culinary sophistication in a private home. The balance of flavors is impeccable." "Who is your chef? I must have their name." Mama Beatrice beamed, preening under the praise like a cat in the sun. "Oh, Mr. Sterling, you are too kind. It is just a little something I whipped up. Cooking has always been a passion of mine. You know what they say, the secret ingredient is always love." She laughed, a tinkling artificial sound that made my teeth ache. Bianca nodded enthusiastically, playing her part in the deception. "Mom is amazing in the kitchen. She has always had a natural talent. We are so spoiled." I stood in the shadows of the butler's pantry, my hands clenched around a water pitcher. They were stealing my work, claiming my skill as their own, without a second of hesitation. It was not just a lie, it was a theft of my identity, my competence, my worth. But I did not storm in. I did not scream. I waited. Preston wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, his eyes scanning the room for something to assert his dominance over. The food was good, but his ego needed feeding too. He spotted me through the gap in the door and a cruel glint entered his eyes. "Beatrice, the food is delicious, but the service is lacking," he announced loudly, his voice carrying over the conversation. "We need more wine. And I think Mr. Sterling's water glass is empty." "Where is that girl? The one you hired to help out?" Mama Beatrice waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, she is probably in the back cleaning up. You know how help can be these days, slow and easily distracted." "Call her out here," Preston insisted. "I want her to serve the wine properly. It is important to maintain standards, especially with guests of this caliber." Mama Beatrice sighed, ringing a small crystal bell on the table. "Aaliyah," she called, her voice sharp and commanding. "Come out here. Mr. Preston needs you." I took a deep breath, smoothing the front of the oversized gray dress. This was it. The moment they wanted to use to humiliate me. The moment they thought would cement my place as the lowest creature in their hierarchy. But they did not know that every step I took toward that table was a step closer to their destruction. I pushed through the swinging door, keeping my head bowed, my posture submissive. But beneath the lowered lashes, my eyes were razor sharp, scanning the room, assessing the players, calculating the angles. I walked toward the table, the heavy crystal water pitcher in my hand, feeling the weight of their gazes. To them, I was a servant. To me, I was the wolf entering the sheepfold. "Yes, sir," I said, my voice soft but steady. "How may I serve you?" I moved around the table like a shadow, clutching the neck of the 1998 Cabernet. My hands were steady despite the oversized uniform that threatened to swallow me whole. I approached Mr. Sterling from the right, just as etiquette dictated. He was deep in conversation with Preston, nodding politely as my brother-in-law rambled on about zoning laws he clearly did not understand. I leaned in, ensuring the label faced him, and began to pour. The dark ruby liquid cascaded into the crystal glass without a single drop spilling. It was a perfect pour executed with the muscle memory of someone who had hosted dignitaries and royalty. Mr. Sterling paused mid-nod. His eyes drifted from the wine to the hand pouring it, then up to my face. The polite indifference in his gaze evaporated instantly, replaced by a shock so profound it nearly knocked him out of his chair. He knew me, not as Aaliyah the servant, but as A.J. Jenkins, the silent partner in his latest venture capital fund, the woman who had secured his membership at the Augusta National Golf Club just last month. Miss Jenkins. He breathed, his voice barely a whisper. He started to push his chair back, his instincts as a gentleman compelling him to stand for a business equal. His face was a mask of confusion and outrage, seeing me in rags serving food to people who were beneath my pay grade. I caught his eye immediately. I gave a microscopic shake of my head, my finger tapping once against the side of the bottle. It was a signal we used in negotiations. Hold your position. Do not reveal your hand. Sterling froze. He was a shark in the boardroom, and he recognized a trap when he saw one. He slowly settled back into his chair, his eyes narrowing as he looked from me to Preston, then back to me. He understood. This was not a service. This was a setup. He picked up his glass and took a sip, his gaze locking onto mine with a silent promise of complicity. Preston, however, saw none of this nuance. He only saw his most important investor staring at the help. His insecurity flared like a match dropped in gasoline. He slammed his hand onto the table, making the silverware jump. "What are you doing, hovering over him like a vulture?" Preston barked, his face twisting into a sneer. "Can you not see Mr. Sterling is trying to enjoy his wine? You are making him uncomfortable. Step back, you idiot. Do you have no concept of personal space?" I stepped back, clutching the bottle to my chest, my eyes cast down to hide the cold amusement burning there. Preston thought he was defending his guest. He did not realize he was yelling at the only person in the room who could save him from financial ruin. "I apologize, sir," I murmured, playing my part to perfection. Sterling watched Preston with a look of pure ice. "Actually, Preston," he said, his voice smooth but dangerous, "I was just admiring the pour. It is rare to find such steady hands these days." Preston laughed, a nervous braying sound. "You are too kind, sir. She is just lucky she did not drop it. Get away from the table, Aaliyah. Go refill the water pitchers, and try not to breathe on the guests." I turned away, leaving Preston to bask in his delusions. He had just insulted his savior and defended his executioner. The stage was set, the players were in position, and Preston had just delivered his own eulogy without even realizing it. The dining room fell silent as I approached Preston with the tureen of lobster bisque. It was scalding hot, a rich, creamy orange that smelled of cognac and cream. I could feel the heat radiating through the porcelain. Preston watched me come closer, his eyes tracking my movement with the predatory focus of a cat waiting to swat a mouse. He was still smarting from Mr. Sterling's comment about my steady hands. He needed to prove a point. He needed to show everyone in the room exactly where I belonged in the pecking order. As I leaned in to ladle the soup into his bowl, he moved. It was not a subtle twitch. It was a deliberate, violent jerk of his elbow. His arm connected with my wrist hard. The ladle slipped, the tureen tipped. A wave of boiling hot bisque cascaded over the front of my gray uniform, soaking through the cheap polyester and scalding the skin of my stomach and thighs. I gasped, dropping the heavy ladle onto the table with a loud clatter. The pain was immediate and intense, a searing burn that made my vision blur. But I did not scream. I did not drop the tureen. I set it down with a shaking hand and stood there dripping orange sludge onto the expensive Persian rug. "You stupid cow!" Preston shouted, jumping up from his chair and wiping a microscopic speck of soup from his sleeve. "Look what you did! You nearly ruined my suit! Are you blind as well as dumb? I knew we should not have let you out of the basement. You are a walking disaster. You are an embarrassment to this family." I looked around the table, waiting for anyone to ask if I was burned. Bianca was covering her mouth with her linen napkin, her shoulders shaking with suppressed giggles, as if watching a clown slip on a banana peel. Coco did not even bother to hide her amusement. She was smirking openly, tapping away on her phone, likely texting her friends about the entertainment. Mama Beatrice was not laughing. She was glaring at me with a hatred so pure it felt colder than the winter rain outside. Her eyes bored into mine, promising retribution for embarrassing her in front of a billionaire. She looked at the rug, then at me as if I were the stain that needed to be scrubbed away. "Clean it up," Preston barked, pointing at the floor with a trembling finger. "Get on your knees and clean it up before it sets. Then get out of my sight. You are unfit to serve pigs, let alone people." I did not move. I did not grab a napkin to wipe the scalding soup from my skin. I did not kneel. I let the liquid drip onto the floor, let the stain set into the fabric of my uniform, let the burns sear into my memory. I raised my head slowly and locked eyes with Preston. The room went deadly quiet. The air crackled with the electricity of a storm about to break. Even Mr. Sterling seemed to hold his breath, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. I stepped closer to him, ignoring the smell of lobster and old hate. I looked deep into his watery, weak eyes and spoke in a voice that was low, calm, and terrified him, though he did not know why yet. "Remember this moment, Preston," I said. "Burn it into your brain. Remember exactly how powerful you feel right now, because it is the last time you will ever feel this way again. Get out!" Preston bellowed, his face a mask of performative outrage. He pointed a trembling finger toward the kitchen door, his chest heaving as if he had just survived a mortal combat, rather than simply assaulting a woman with soup. "Do not let me see your face again tonight. You have done enough damage." I glanced at Mr. Sterling. The older man was frowning, his fork resting on his plate, his appetite clearly gone. Preston followed my gaze and panic flared in his eyes. He misinterpreted the billionaire's disgust completely. He thought Sterling was repulsed by my clumsiness, by the stain on the rug, by the mere presence of a servant who could not perform her duties. He thought he needed to prove that he shared Sterling's high standards. "I am so sorry, Mr. Sterling," Preston groveled, turning his back on me to address his guest. "It is so hard to find good help these days. She is mentally slow, you know. We try to be charitable, but some people are just beyond saving. I will have her removed from the property immediately." "Just go," he hissed over his shoulder at me, snapping his fingers, as if shooing a stray dog. I did not offer a retort. I did not look back. I turned on my heel, the soup cold and sticky against my skin, and pushed through the swinging door into the kitchen. As the door settled into place, muffling the sounds of the dining room, the trembling in my hands stopped instantly. The time for acting was over. I walked straight to the tall pantry cabinet in the corner, the one Mama Beatrice rarely opened because it was filled with expired canned goods she refused to throw away. I reached behind a stack of dusty tomato sauce cans and pulled out a garment bag I had stashed there 3 hours ago. I stripped off the gray polyester uniform, peeling the soup-soaked fabric from my skin with a sense of profound liberation. I tossed it into the trash can, where it landed with a wet thud. Good riddance. From the bag I pulled out my armor. It was a white silk suit bespoke from the House of Bijan, tailored to fit me like a second skin. I slipped into the trousers and buttoned the jacket, the cool silk replacing the scratchy, cheap fabric of my servitude. I pulled the pins from my hair, letting it fall, then quickly twisted it up into a severe, elegant chignon. I wiped the last of the bisque from my neck with a wet cloth and applied a fresh coat of blood-red lipstick. I was no longer Aaliyah the maid. I was the CEO. I reached into the inner pocket of the jacket and pulled out a small wireless earpiece. I slid it into my ear and tapped my phone screen, activating the hidden camera I had planted in the chandelier earlier that morning while supposedly dusting. The screen flickered to life. I saw the dining room in high definition. I saw Mr. Sterling staring at his wine glass. I saw Mama Beatrice looking anxious. And I saw Preston pouring himself another drink, his confidence returning now that the problem had been removed. Now that the distraction is gone, I heard Preston say through my earpiece, his voice tinny but clear. Let us talk about the future of this property. I adjusted my cuffs and leaned against the counter watching the screen. Talk away, Preston, I thought. Dig your grave a little deeper. I am listening to every word. Through the high-definition feed of the hidden camera, I watched Preston slide a thick stack of legal documents across the mahogany table. The paper made a dry hissing sound against the wood like a snake moving through dry grass. He put on his most trustworthy smile, the one he used to sell subprime mortgages to widows, and leaned toward my mother. Beatrice, listen to me, he said, his voice dripping with false concern and urgency. We need to secure your future tonight. This house is a money pit. The roof is leaking, the foundation is cracking, and the taxes are eating you alive. It is too much for a woman of your age to manage alone. Sign the transfer deed to my holding company now, and I will finalize the purchase of that luxury condo in Buckhead first thing tomorrow morning. Think about it. Valet parking, concierge service, a view of the skyline. It is what you deserve. A queen should not be living in a crumbling castle. Mama Beatrice picked up the heavy gold fountain pen, but her hand hovered over the signature line. She looked around the dining room, her eyes misty with a rare moment of nostalgia. But Preston, this home has been in the Jenkins family for 3 generations. Your father proposed to me in this room. And are you sure about the condo? You have not shown me the brochure yet. I just feel like everything is moving so fast. Maybe we should wait until after the holidays. Before Preston could answer, Bianca slammed her wine glass down onto the table hard enough to make the silverware rattle. Oh my God, Mom, stop being so difficult. Why do you always have to ruin everything with your hesitation? Preston is working his back off to save you from financial ruin. Do you want to end up homeless? Sign the paper. Coco joined the attack, her voice shrill with the desperation of someone who owed $20,000 to a loan shark. Yeah, Mama, do not be selfish. Think about us for once. If you do not sign, we lose the deal on the condo, and you will be stuck here rotting in this old museum alone. Do it for the family. Do it so we do not have to worry about you anymore. The combined pressure cracked her resolve. Mama Beatrice looked at her golden children, believing their lies because the alternative was too painful to accept. She pressed the nib to the paper. I watched the ink flow, sealing her fate. The moment she lifted the pen, Preston snatched the document away, as if he were afraid she might burn it. He blew on the ink to dry it, a shark smelling blood in the water. Then he leaned close to Bianca, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that my earpiece picked up with crystal clarity. It is done, he hissed, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. Forget the condo in Buckhead. I booked a bed at Shady Pines Nursing Home this morning. It is the state-funded one near the sewage treatment plant. We will drop the old hag off tomorrow morning after we sell the furniture. We are going to be rich, babe. The ink was barely dry on the paper when Coco moved in to seal the deception. She knelt beside Mama Beatrice's chair, resting her head on our mother's shoulder in a performance worthy of an Academy Award. Mama, please, she begged, her voice pitching up into that little girl whine that had always opened Beatrice's wallet and closed her mind to reason. You have to finish signing. The registrar at Harvard emailed me again. If the tuition wire does not hit their account by tomorrow morning, they are going to revoke my scholarship status. Do you want me to be humiliated? Do you want me to have to drop out because we could not liquidate this old asset in time? Beatrice looked down at her youngest daughter, her eyes filled with a blind, desperate love that made my stomach turn. No, baby. Never. You are the pride of this family. A Harvard lawyer. I will not let anything stop you. She scribbled her signature on the final page, handing the deed to her legacy over to a man who planned to destroy it. Thank you, Mama Coco squealed, kissing her cheek. You are saving my life. Saving my... As soon as Beatrice turned her attention to Preston, Coco stood up and stepped back from the table. She pulled her phone from her pocket, her thumbs flying across the screen. She thought she was being subtle. She thought she was invisible because the attention was on Preston, but she was standing directly under the crystal chandelier where I had hidden the microphone, and I could hear her breathing. She brought the phone to her mouth, recording a voice note, her eyes darting around the room to ensure no one was watching. "It is done, baby," she whispered, her voice dripping with malice and triumph. "The old hag just signed. Preston is liquidating the asset tomorrow. I will have the cash for Big T. Tell him to call off his dogs. I told you she was an easy mark. She actually thinks I am going back to class next week." She hit send and slipped the phone into her pocket, smoothing her skirt as if nothing had happened. She turned back to the table, a shark smile plastered on her face, ready to celebrate her victory. But she had made a mistake. She had assumed that just because she was whispering, no one was listening. Mr. Sterling sat just a few feet away, swirling his wine glass. He had been watching her. He had seen the way her face shifted from adoration to contempt the moment her mother looked away. He had heard the whisper. He looked at Coco, then at the oblivious Beatrice, and finally at Preston, who was greedily gathering the papers like a miser counting gold. Mr. Sterling placed his napkin on the table with a decisive motion and shook his head, a look of pure revulsion settling in his eyes. He realized then that he was not dining with a respectable family. He was dining with scavengers picking apart a carcass. He looked toward the kitchen door almost as if he knew I was there and gave a barely perceptible nod. He was done with them. And so was I. Bianca was practically vibrating with excitement. She grabbed the bottle of champagne Preston had opened earlier and poured herself a glass, not caring that it was splashing onto the table. Finally, she squealed, raising the glass to the light. "We are going to be free of this dusty old mausoleum. Preston, honey, we should book that trip to St. Bart's immediately. I saw a villa that is absolutely perfect for us. We can put the kids in that international boarding school you mentioned and just live. No more budget meetings, no more scrimping. We are going to be royalty." She looked at her husband with adoration, her eyes shining with the reflection of a future that did not exist. She saw a partner. I saw a parasite. Preston smiled at her, but it did not reach his eyes. His hand was under the table, thumbing away on his phone. Through the high-resolution camera feed, I zoomed in on the screen. The brightness was turned down low, but my tech was better. The message thread was named My Soulmate, but the contact photo was definitely not Bianca. It was a woman half her age wearing a bikini. Preston typed quickly, his fingers flying across the glass. "Almost done, baby. The old witch just signed the deed. I will flip the property next week, take the commission and the equity, and file the divorce papers on Friday. By the time Bianca realizes the bank accounts are empty, we will be in the Caymans. Love you." He hit send and slid the phone back into his pocket, looking up just in time to catch Bianca leaning in for a kiss. He turned his cheek so her lips landed on his jaw, patting her hand with a condescending rhythm. "Soon, darling," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "We just have to get through the logistics first. But yes, St. Bart sounds magnificent. You deserve it." Bianca beamed, oblivious to the fact that she was kissing the man who was actively plotting her financial murder. She raised her glass high. To us, she toasted, her voice ringing out across the room. To the family, to new beginnings and getting rid of the dead weight. Coco raised her glass, clinking it against Bianca's. To being rich, she laughed. Mama Beatrice wiped a tear from her eye, raising her water glass. "To my wonderful children who take such good care of me." Preston raised his scotch. "To the future." They drank, swallowing the expensive liquid along with their own destruction. In the kitchen, I watched the feed on my phone screen. I adjusted my silk cuffs and checked my reflection in the back of a spoon. "To the future, indeed," I whispered. I disconnected the earpiece and put the phone in my pocket. The time for listening was over. It was time to crash the party. I stood in the butler's pantry, the only room in the house that felt like a neutral zone between the chaos of the kitchen and the lies of the dining room. The air was still and cool, a sharp contrast to the heat rising from my skin. I took a deep breath, centering myself. The woman who had scrubbed floors and eaten crusts of bread was gone. In her place stood the CEO of Vantage Point, and I needed to look the part. I reached into the inner pocket of my white silk blazer and pulled out a small black velvet pouch. It was heavy in my palm. I loosened the drawstrings and tipped the contents into my hand. 2 diamond stud earrings tumbled out, catching the dim light of the pantry and fracturing it into 1,000 rainbows. They were 5 carats, each flawless D-color stones, cut by the finest jeweler in London. They cost more than the college tuition Coco claimed to need. I lifted them to my ears, my hands steady and sure. As I fastened the backs, the click of the metal felt like locking a weapon into place. Next, I turned to the small mirror hanging on the back of the cabinet door. I smoothed my hair, checking the severity of the chignon. Not a single strand was out of place. I looked at my reflection, and for the first time all day, I recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes were hard. Her jaw was set. She was not a victim. She was a predator who had finished stalking her prey and was ready to strike. I applied a final layer of crimson lipstick, blotting it carefully. It was war paint. I took out my phone one last time. I did not need to hide it anymore. I dialed the number for Marcus, the head of my personal security detail, who had been parked down the street in an unmarked SUV for the last 4 hours, waiting for my signal. He answered on the first ring. "We are ready, Miss Jenkins. Just give the word." I looked toward the swinging door where the muffled sounds of my family celebrating their imaginary wealth drifted through. They were toasting to a future that I had already foreclosed on. They were laughing at jokes made by a man who was about to lose everything. "Bring the team to the front door, Marcus," I said, my voice low and devoid of any warmth. "Do not knock. Just be ready to escort several individuals off the premises. It is time to clean this house properly. Prepare to take out the trash." "Understood. We are moving in." I ended the call and slipped the phone into my pocket. Then I turned my attention to the object resting on the counter. It was a thick leather-bound portfolio embossed with the Vantage Point logo. Inside was the truth. Every lie they had told, every law they had broken, every dollar they had stolen was documented in high definition and triplicate. The tax lien certificate that proved I owned the house. The expulsion letter from Harvard proving Coco was a fraud. The hidden divorce papers Preston had drafted to blindside Bianca. It was a heavy book, but as I picked it up, it felt lighter than air. I ran my hand over the leather cover, feeling the texture under my fingertips. This was not just paperwork. This was justice. It was the receipt for 18 years of servitude and humiliation. I gripped it tightly, feeling the sharp edges of the papers inside. They wanted a servant. They wanted someone to clean up their messes. Well, I was about to clean up the biggest mess of all. I walked toward the dining room door, my heels clicking a rhythmic countdown on the hardwood floor. The show was about to begin. The heavy double doors to the dining room did not just open, they exploded inward, slamming against the paneled walls with a violence that shook the crystal glasses on the table. The sound was like a gunshot, instantly silencing the toasts and the greedy laughter. Every head snapped toward the entrance. Every mouth hung open mid-sentence. The air in the room seemed to undergo a sudden drop in pressure, sucking the oxygen out of their lungs. I stepped through the threshold. I did not walk with the hurried, scuttling gait of the servant girl trying to avoid a beating. I glided. My movements were slow, deliberate, and predatory. The heels of my Italian stilettos struck the hardwood floor with a sharp, rhythmic click that echoed like the ticking of a bomb. Click, click, click. I was a vision in white silk. The bespoke suit from the House of Bijan flowed around my frame, catching the light of the chandelier and throwing it back with an arrogant gleam. The fabric was so fine, it looked like liquid moonlight, tailored to perfection, nipping in at the waist and flaring just enough to suggest absolute power. My hair, no longer a frizzy mess, tied back with a rubber band, was sculpted into an elegant, severe chignon that exposed the long line of my neck and the cold fire of the 5-carat diamonds blazing at my ears. My lips were painted a deep blood red, a slash of color, on a face that was as impassive as marble. I walked straight to the head of the table where Preston sat, frozen, his champagne glass halfway to his mouth. I stopped and stood there towering over him, looking down with eyes that held no warmth, no fear, and absolutely no mercy. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a thick, suffocating blanket. For 10 glorious seconds nobody moved, nobody breathed, and nobody knew who I was. They looked at me and they saw a stranger. They saw a woman of immense wealth and status. They saw someone who belonged in boardrooms and private jets, not in their dining room. Preston stared at me with a mixture of confusion and instinctive lust, his eyes tracking the expensive cut of my jacket. Bianca glared with instant jealousy, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the jewelry that was worth more than her entire wardrobe. Mama Beatrice looked bewildered, her mind unable to reconcile this vision of power with the reality of her life. They looked right at my face, the same face they had looked at for 28 years, and they did not recognize me. Because they had never really looked at me. To them, I had been a prop, a tool, a piece of furniture. They had never seen Aaliyah. They had only seen what I could do for them. But now they had no choice. I was impossible to ignore. I was the sun, and they were about to burn. Then I saw it. The spark of recognition in Coco's eyes. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as the pieces clicked together. She looked from my face to the scar on my arm where she had scratched me earlier, hidden now under fine silk. Her eyes went wide with terror. She knew. And as her gasp broke the silence, the illusion shattered for the rest of them. The realization rippled around the table, a wave of shock and horror that was more satisfying than any wine I had ever tasted. The help had arrived, but I was not there to clear the plates. I was there to clear the house. "Who are you?" Preston bellowed, jumping to his feet and knocking over his champagne flute. The expensive crystal shattered on the floor, spraying glass and wine across his polished shoes. But he did not even flinch. His face was a mask of fury and confusion, his eyes darting from my face to my suit, trying to make sense of the impossibility standing before him. "How did you get in here?" "Security. Get this woman out of my house immediately." I did not flinch, I did not step back. I looked him dead in the eye and let the silence stretch for another beat, letting his fear marinate. Then I raised my arm and slammed the heavy leather portfolio onto the table. The sound was like a thunderclap echoing through the room, making Mama Beatrice jump and clutch her pearls. The force of it knocked over the salt cellar, spilling white grains across the mahogany like a bad omen. "I am Aaliyah," I said, my voice low and vibrating with power. "But you might know me better as the CEO of Vantage Point, the woman who owns half of Atlanta, the woman who decides which doors open for you and which ones slam in your face." The name Vantage Point hit the room like a physical blow. I saw the recognition flicker in Preston's eyes, followed immediately by a wave of pure, unadulterated terror. He knew the name. Everyone in his circle knew the name. Vantage Point was not just a company, it was the gatekeeper to the elite. It controlled the most exclusive real estate, the private clubs, the investment circles. It was the power behind the throne, and he had spent the last 6 months trying desperately to get a meeting with its elusive founder. "You..." He stammered, his face draining of color until he looked like a corpse. "You are the founder of Vantage Point." "But that is impossible. You are a maid. You scrub floors. You eat garbage in the basement." I laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "I am whatever I choose to be, Preston. I scrubbed floors because I wanted to see who you really were when you thought no one important was watching. And congratulations, you passed the test. You proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that you are a small, petty man with no honor and no future." Bianca stood up, her hands trembling. "This is a joke, right? Aaliyah, you hired an actor or something. You cannot be rich. You are wearing my old clothes. You begged me for $5 last week." I turned my gaze to my sister. "I begged you for nothing, Bianca. I asked you for decency. I asked you for respect. And you gave me neither. Those old clothes were a costume, a test of your character, And you failed. You failed so spectacularly that I almost feel sorry for you. Almost. Mama Beatrice was staring at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Aaliyah, she whispered, her voice shaking. Is this true? Do you really have money? I looked at her, at the woman who had birthed me, but never mothered me. I have more money than you can comprehend, Mama. I have enough money to buy this entire neighborhood and turn it into a parking lot if I wanted to. But do not worry, I have much better plans for my money, and none of them involve you. The room was deadly silent. The weight of my revelation pressed down on them, suffocating their greed and their arrogance. They looked at me with new eyes, eyes filled with fear and a dawning realization that the power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. The servant was gone, the master had arrived, and Judgment Day was here. The scraping of a heavy wooden chair against the floor broke the paralyzed silence. Mr. Sterling rose to his feet. He did not look at Preston. He did not look at Mama Beatrice. His eyes were locked on me with a mixture of reverence and disbelief. He adjusted his suit jacket and walked around the table, moving with a gravitas that commanded absolute attention. He stopped directly in front of me and extended his hand, not as a superior to a subordinate, but as an equal to an equal. Ms. Jenkins, he said, his voice deep and resonant, carrying to every corner of the silent room. It is an honor to finally meet you in person. I must apologize for my earlier silence. Your performance was so convincing, I truly believed I was watching a tragedy unfolding. I had no idea I was in the presence of royalty. I took his hand, my grip firm and professional. No apology necessary, Mr. Sterling, I replied. Sometimes one must stoop to conquer. I assume you received my proposal regarding the Midtown Development Project. I did, he said, nodding gravely. And after seeing how you handle your own affairs, I am more inclined than ever to sign. You have a ruthlessness that this city needs. He turned slowly to face the table, his gaze sweeping over my family with withering scorn. You seem confused? He addressed them, his voice dripping with ice. Let me clarify the situation for you. You believe you are sitting with a servant. You are mistaken. You are sitting in the presence of the most powerful woman in Atlanta. Vantage Point is not just a company. It is an empire. Ms. Jenkins here holds the keys to every major boardroom in the state. I have spent the last 6 months begging for 10 minutes of her time. And you fools have been treating her like cattle. He looked at Preston, who was trembling so hard his teeth were chattering. You told me you had an in with Vantage Point, Preston. You told me you knew the owner personally. You lied to my face while she was pouring your wine. You are not just a fraud, you are an idiot. And I do not do business with idiots. The weight of his words crashed down on Mama Beatrice like a physical blow. Her eyes bulged and her face turned a sickly shade of gray. The realization was too big, too heavy for her narrow mind to comprehend. The daughter she had banished to the basement, the daughter she had mocked and belittled, was the one person in the world her idols bowed down to. Her hand went limp. The crystal goblet she was holding slipped from her fingers. It fell in slow motion, tumbling through the air until it hit the edge of the table and shattered. Shards of glass exploded outward, and red wine sprayed across the white tablecloth, staining it like fresh blood. The crash was deafening, a violent punctuation mark to the end of her delusions. "Oh my God," she gasped, her voice a broken wheeze. "Aaliyah, you. It is you." I looked down at the spreading stain, at the broken glass and the broken woman behind it. "Careful, Mama," I said, my voice soft and lethal. "That is expensive crystal. You are going to have to work a lot of overtime to pay for that. But do not worry. I know a place that is hiring. They always need someone to scrub the floors." The color drained from her face, leaving her looking old and withered. She slumped in her chair, her power evaporating like smoke. She looked at me, and for the first time, she did not see a disappointment. She saw her judge, and she knew she was guilty. Preston was clutching the deed my mother had just signed, holding it to his chest like a shield. He looked at me with a sneer, trying to regain his composure. You can talk all you want, Aaliyah, he spat. But I have the signature. Mama Beatrice signed the transfer. This house is legally under my control, and there is nothing your fancy suit or your fake title can do about it. We are selling it tomorrow, and you are trespassing. I shook my head slowly, a look of genuine pity crossing my face. You really do not do your due diligence, do you, Preston? That piece of paper you are holding is worthless. It is nothing more than expensive kindling. You cannot sell this house, Preston, because Mama Beatrice does not own it anymore. And neither do you. I reached into the leather portfolio and slid a single document across the table. It spun on the polished wood and came to a stop directly in front of Mr. Sterling, who looked down at it and let out a low whistle of appreciation. It is a tax lien certificate, I announced, my voice carrying to the back of the room. Let me give you a lesson in American real estate law, since you seem to have skipped that class in business school. When a homeowner fails to pay their property taxes for an extended period, the county government does not just wait politely for the money. They auction off the debt to investors. They sell a claim against the property called a tax lien. I walked around the table, my hand trailing along the edge of the chairs. Mama has not paid property taxes on this estate for 3 years. She owes the county $45,000. The county put that debt up for auction 12 months ago. An investment firm bought that debt. They paid the taxes for her. In exchange, they received the right to collect that money back with interest, or if the debt remained unpaid, to foreclose on the property and take full ownership of the deed. I stopped behind Mama Beatrice, who was trembling in her chair. That investment firm gave the homeowner a redemption period, a specific window of time to pay back the debt and save the house. In the state of Georgia, that redemption period is 12 months. If you do not pay by the deadline, you lose everything. The investor gets the house free and clear. I leaned down and whispered into my mother's ear. The firm that bought your tax debt is a subsidiary of Vantage Point. My company. We bought your debt, Mama. We paid your taxes, and we waited. We sent notices to the mailbox, but you were too busy throwing them away to read them. You thought they were junk mail. They were eviction warnings. I straightened up and looked at Preston, who was staring at the document on the table as if it were a poisonous snake. The redemption period expired exactly 1 hour ago. At 5 p.m. today, the foreclosure was finalized. The title has already been transferred electronically to my holding company. I smiled a cold, hard smile. So you see, Preston, that paper Mama signed is void. She cannot transfer the house to you because she does not own it. I do. I bought this $5 million estate for $45,000 in back taxes. This is my house, my table, my wine. And you are all just unauthorized occupants who are wearing out my patience. The game is over, Preston, and you did not just lose. You were never even playing the same sport. You look pale, Preston, I said, my voice smooth and dangerously calm. But sit down, we are not finished yet. You see, owning this house is just the beginning of your problems. I still have the rest of this portfolio to get through, and the contents are far more interesting than a simple property deed. I turned a page in the leather binder, the crisp sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. You have been desperate to join the Vantage Point Executive Club for years, haven't you? It is the most exclusive business network in the South. You sent 3 applications in the last 6 months alone. You called the membership office every week. You thought you were being ignored by some anonymous board of directors who didn't appreciate your genius. I pulled out a document stamped with a large red ink mark that read, "Rejected." You were not being ignored, Preston. You were being reviewed by me. I am the chairwoman of the admission board. I read every single one of your desperate letters. I read your inflated list of assets. I read your pathetic attempts to name-drop people who actually despise you. And I was the one who stamped this rejection every single time. You are not Vantage Point material. You lack the capital, you lack the class, and most importantly, you lack the integrity. Preston stared at the rejection letter, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. His dreams of social climbing were being shredded right in front of his eyes. But I was not done. I slid the file further down the table until it rested directly under Mr. Sterling's nose. But I did not just reject his application, Mr. Sterling. I ordered a forensic audit of his firm. Standard procedure for anyone trying to enter my inner circle. Take a look at page 5. Mr. Sterling put on his reading glasses, his hands trembling slightly. He looked at the page I indicated. Preston claims his firm is generating 20% returns annually, I explained, my eyes locked on Preston, who was now sweating profusely. But if you look at the bank transfers in column B, you will see a very different story. He is not investing the money. He is cycling it. He takes capital from new investors like you, Mr. Sterling, and uses it to pay dividends to the old investors to keep them quiet. He is not a financial genius. He is running a textbook Ponzi scheme. Preston lunged forward, his face twisted in panic. That is a lie. Those are private documents. You have no right. She forged them, Mr. Sterling. Do not listen to her. Mr. Sterling stood up slowly, holding the audit report like it was a contagious disease. He looked at the numbers, then he looked at Preston. The respect he had shown earlier was gone, replaced by a cold, hard fury. I recognize these account numbers, Sterling said, his voice low and terrifying. This is the account you told me was a secure bond fund. You have been siphoning money out of it to pay for your leased cars and your wife's jewelry. Mr. Sterling, please let me explain, Preston begged, reaching out a hand. Do not touch me, Sterling roared, backing away. You tried to steal $10 million from me. You stood in this room, you ate this food, and you looked me in the eye while planning to rob me blind. You are a parasite. Sterling threw the papers down onto the table. Consider our partnership terminated effective immediately. And do not think it ends there. I am calling the Securities and Exchange Commission the moment I step out of this house. My lawyers will be in touch and they will be bringing the district attorney with them. You are finished in this town, Preston. I will make sure you never work in finance again. You will be lucky if you can get a job sweeping the streets when I am done with you. I watched Preston collapse back into his chair, his legs giving out. He looked small. He looked weak. The arrogant tyrant who had kicked a bucket of dirty water on me was gone. In his place was a ruined man facing prison, and he knew exactly who had put him there. I smiled, taking a sip of the wine he had poured. The vintage tasted excellent. It tasted like victory. Preston was not the only one living a lie in this room. I turned my gaze to Bianca, who was sitting frozen in her chair, clutching the stem of her wineglass so hard I thought it might snap. She was staring at her husband with wide, terrified eyes, trying to process the fact that the man she had idolized was a fraud. She still believed in their marriage, though. She still believed that even if they were broke, they were in it together. She was holding on to that delusion like a lifeline, and it was time for me to cut the rope. I reached into the portfolio one last time and pulled out a stapled document. It was not as thick as the audit report, but it was far more personal. I did not slide this one across the table. I walked over to Bianca and placed it gently on her placemat, right next to her trembling hand. You asked me earlier why I was wearing your old clothes, Bianca. I said, my voice soft, but carrying a deadly weight. You told me I was nothing. You told me to find a rich husband if I wanted to survive. Well, it seems you took your own advice a little too seriously. But you forgot one thing. You have to make sure the husband actually wants to keep you. Bianca looked down at the document. Her eyes scanned the bold header and her breath hitched in a sob. Petition for dissolution of marriage. What is this? She whispered, her voice barely audible. It is exactly what it looks like, I replied. Preston filed these papers 3 days ago. He did not tell you because he needed you to pressure Mama into signing the house over first. He needed the asset to be liquid so he could take the money and run. Look at page 4, Bianca. Look at the asset division. She turned the page, her hands shaking so violently she tore the paper slightly. She read the clause I pointed to. It outlined a complete transfer of all joint liquid assets to an offshore account in the Caymans, leaving Bianca with the debts, the credit card bills, and the lease on the car. "He is leaving you, Bianca," I said ruthlessly. "He is taking the money from the house sale, and he is disappearing. And that romantic trip to St. Bart's he promised you. It is not for you." I tapped the phone screen I had captured earlier, showing the text message thread with his mistress. "He is going with a woman named Crystal. She is 22 years old, she is an Instagram model, and she is currently waiting for him at the airport. He texted her 5 minutes ago telling her he was almost done with the old hag and the nagging wife." Bianca stared at the phone screen, reading the words over and over again. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and shattered. The denial in her eyes vanished, replaced by a raw, primal agony. The illusion of her perfect life, her perfect marriage, her perfect future dissolved into ash. She slowly lifted her head and looked at Preston. He was slumped in his chair looking defeated, but when he saw the look in her eyes, he flinched. "Bianca," he stammered, holding up his hands. "Baby, listen to me. She is lying. It is a misunderstanding. Crystal is just a client." "Liar!" Bianca screamed. The sound was not human. It was the shriek of a wounded animal. She launched herself across the table, scattering plates and silverware. She did not care about her designer dress or her dignity. She grabbed Preston by the lapels of his suit and shook him, screaming in his face. "You used me!" She shrieked, her nails digging into his face, drawing blood. "You were going to leave me with nothing, after everything I did for you. I lied for you. I stole for you. I treated my own sister like dirt for you. And you were going to throw me away like garbage." She began to hit him, slapping him wildly, pummeling his chest with her fists. Preston tried to push her away, but she was fueled by pure hysterical rage. They crashed to the floor, a tangled mess of limbs and expensive fabric rolling around in the spilled wine and broken glass. I stepped back, watching the spectacle with cold detachment. The perfect couple, the envy of the neighborhood, was tearing each other apart on the dining room floor. They were destroying each other, and I did not have to lift a finger. I just had to tell the truth. The sound of Bianca wailing on the floor faded into a dull background noise as I turned my attention to the final loose end. Coco was standing near the buffet table, trying to make herself invisible. She was inching toward the exit, her eyes darting back and forth like a trapped animal looking for a gap in the fence. She thought that because Preston and Bianca had taken the spotlight, she might be able to slip away into the night and leave the wreckage behind. She was wrong. "Sit down, Coco," I commanded, my voice cracking like a whip across the room. "We are not finished." She flinched, stopping dead in her tracks. She looked at me with a mix of defiance and terror biting her lip, but she did not move toward the door again. She knew better. I walked back to the table and flipped the leather portfolio to the very last section. "You know, Mama always bragged about your intellect, the genius of the family, the future Supreme Court justice who was going to restore the Jenkins name. It is a beautiful story, really. It is a shame it is a complete work of fiction." I pulled out a document on thick cream-colored paper stamped with the crimson crest of Harvard Law School. I held it up so Mama Beatrice could see it clearly. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying over Bianca, but she squinted at the paper, trying to focus through her tears. "This is a letter from the Dean of Students." I explained, my voice calm and factual. "It is dated 4 months ago. It states that Courtney Coco Jenkins was formally expelled from the university for academic dishonesty. Specifically, she was caught paying a third party to take her exams for her. She is not a law student, Mama. She is a dropout. She has not stepped foot in a classroom since last semester." Mama Beatrice gasped, bringing a trembling hand to her mouth. "No," she whispered, shaking her head violently. "That cannot be true. Coco tells me about her classes every day. She studies so hard. She needs tuition money. I just signed the check. She lies to you every day," I corrected ruthlessly, "just like she lied about why she needed the money from the house sale. She does not need tuition, Mama. She needs protection money. I took out my phone and tapped the screen, playing the audio recording I had captured in the kitchen earlier. The volume was set to maximum. Coco's voice rang out clear and sharp, filling the dining room with her betrayal. The old hag just signed, "I will have the cash for Big T. She is an easy mark." The recording ended, and the silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Mama Beatrice looked at her youngest daughter, the baby she had spoiled and protected above all others, and saw a stranger. The heartbreak on her face was total. It was the look of a woman realizing that her love had been weaponized against her. Coco Beatrice whispered, her voice breaking into 1,000 pieces. "You called me an old hag. You wanted to sell my home to pay a gambling debt to a gangster. I gave you everything. I bought you a car when I could not afford new shoes. I sent you money every month while I ate leftovers. How could you do this to me?" Coco stood there trembling, her face flushing a deep angry red. Then suddenly the mask snapped. Her face twisted into a sneer of pure ugliness, stripping away the facade of the sweet, innocent daughter. She threw her fake designer bag onto the floor and screamed, "Oh, shut up, you pathetic old woman!" "Yes, I lied. So what? Look at you. You are useless. You have no money. You have no connections. You are just a broke widow sitting in a rotting house pretending to be somebody you are not. I needed that money to save my life. Big T is going to kill me if I do not pay up. And what were you going to do with the money anyway? Waste it on more fake pearls. You should have sold this dump years ago. You owe me this. You owe me a future because the one you gave me is trash. You are the reason I am like this because you are too weak to provide for us." She spat the words out like venom, blaming her mother for her own failures. Mama Beatrice shrank back into her chair, physically withering under the assault of the child she had loved the most. Coco stood panting, her chest heaving, her eyes wild with entitlement and rage. She had finally exposed her true self, and it was uglier than anything hiding in the basement. "Do not look at her like she is a monster, Mama. Do not look at Coco with that broken expression, as if you cannot understand where that venom came from. You are looking in a mirror. She is not a mutation. She is your creation. You planted those seeds of entitlement. You watered them with your delusion, and you fed them with your lies. And now you are shocked that the harvest is rotten." I walked slowly toward the head of the table where my mother sat, surrounded by the wreckage of her dinner party. "You spent 20 years pushing me into the shadows. You made me live in a damp basement with the rats and the mold. You made me scrub the toilets and polish the silver while you told everyone I was slow and difficult. You stripped me of my dignity day by day. You did it because I was the only one who saw you for what you were. You sacrificed my childhood. You sold my happiness piece by piece to fund their fantasies. You took the money my father left for me, and you spent it on Bianca's lavish wedding to a con man and Coco's fake education at a school she never attended. You treated your eldest daughter like a mule so your other children could live like show ponies. And look at the return on your investment, Beatrice. Look at them. Bianca is a fool who married a thief because you taught her that a man's wallet was more important than his character. Coco is a criminal and a liar because you taught her that consequences were for poor people. You created a family of parasites, and the irony is sickening. The daughter you threw away is the only one standing here with clean hands and a clear conscience. The daughter you called useless is the only one who actually built something real. The daughter you treated like a servant is the only one who can afford to buy and sell you 10 times over." Mama Beatrice looked around the room. She saw the absolute ruins of her life. She saw Preston bleeding on the floor. She saw Bianca sobbing in a pile of broken glass. She saw Coco seething with hatred near the door. And then she looked at me. She looked at the white silk suit. She looked at the diamond earrings catching the light. She looked at the tax lien certificate on the table that proved I held her fate in my hands. The realization hit her, not in her heart but in her wallet. I was her last hope. I was the new bank account. The survival instinct that had made her so cruel suddenly made her pathetic. She slid out of her chair. Her knees hit the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. She crawled toward me, pushing aside the broken crystal and the spilled wine, ignoring the glass that must have been cutting into her skin. She reached out, grabbing the hem of my trousers with desperate claw-like fingers. Her face was wet with tears, but her eyes were sharp and calculating, searching for a weakness she could exploit. "Aaliyah, baby," she wailed, her voice trembling with a performance that rivaled Coco's. "Please forgive me. I was wrong. I was so wrong. You know I always loved you deep down. You were always my special girl, my strong girl. I was just tough on you because I wanted you to be ready for the world. And look at you now. You are so successful. Do not kick your old mother out on the street. Do not let me die in a state home. We are family, Aaliyah. Blood is thicker than water. We can fix this. You have so much money now. You can take care of us. Just give me another chance, baby. I will be better. I swear on your father's grave I will be better." I looked down at the woman groveling at my feet. She was not asking for forgiveness. She was asking for a handout. She did not love me. She loved what I could provide, and that was the saddest truth of all. I looked down at the woman clutching the hem of my silk trousers. My mother was sobbing, begging for a salvation she did not deserve. Her tears were staining the fabric of a suit that cost more than the car she drove, but I felt nothing. The anger had burned itself out, leaving only a cold, hollow clarity. I gently but firmly pulled my leg free from her grasp, stepping back to put distance between us. I was done being their savior. I was done being their scapegoat. "Stand up, Beatrice," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "You are embarrassing yourself, and you are wrinkling my suit." I raised my hand and snapped my fingers once. The sound cut through the weeping and the shouting like a gunshot. Instantly, the heavy double doors swung open again. Marcus entered the room flanked by 4 massive security operatives dressed in tactical black. They moved with the silent, synchronized efficiency of a wolf pack, filing into the room and taking up positions behind each of the family members. The air in the room shifted instantly from domestic chaos to military precision. "Marcus," I said, keeping my eyes locked on Preston. "The party is over. Please escort these unauthorized individuals off the premises immediately." Preston scrambled backward, his chair screeching against the floor. "You cannot do this," he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "We have rights. This is our home. We have lived here for 10 years. You cannot just throw us out on the street in the middle of the night." I took a step closer to him, invading his personal space until he shrank back against the wall. "Watch me, Preston. You are trespassing on private property owned by Vantage Point Holdings. You are not tenants. You are squatters. And since I know you are all thieves, let me be very clear about the rules of your departure." I turned to face the group, addressing them collectively, like a judge delivering a death sentence. "You are leaving right now. You will be escorted to the curb. You have exactly 24 hours to retrieve your personal effects. That means clothing and toiletries only. You will not take the furniture. You will not take the art. You will not take the silver or the electronics. Every single item in this house will be inventoried against the insurance manifest. If so much as a teaspoon is missing, I will have you arrested for grand larceny." "But where will we go?" Bianca wailed, clutching her stomach. "We have nowhere to go. Our accounts are frozen. We have no cash. Aaliyah, please, you cannot be this cruel. We are your family." I looked at my sister, the woman who had laughed, while her children threw trash at me. "You should have thought about that before you treated me like an animal in my own home. You have friends, Bianca. Go crash on a couch. Or better yet, go ask Preston to buy you a hotel room. Oh wait, that is right. He spent all his money on his mistress." Marcus nodded to his team. "Move them out." The guards stepped forward. One grabbed Preston by the arm, hauling him up as he kicked and screamed threats of lawsuits. Another took Coco, who was swearing like a sailor, her face twisted in ugly rage. Bianca was sobbing so hard she had to be practically carried out her heels, dragging on the floor. Beatrice stood up shakily, wiping her eyes. She looked at me one last time, waiting for me to crack, waiting for the daughter she knew to surface and offer a warm bed. Goodbye, Mama, I said softly, turning my back on her. Do not forget to turn in your key at the gate. I heard the heavy footsteps recede down the hallway, followed by the slamming of the front door. The noise of their protest faded into the night, leaving a ringing silence in their wake. I stood alone in the center of the dining room, surrounded by the debris of their greed. The air felt lighter. The house felt bigger. For the first time in my life, the basement door was closed, and I was the one standing in the light. The trash had finally been taken out. The room was finally quiet. The chaotic sounds of my siblings being dragged out the front door had faded, leaving only the heavy, terrified breathing of the woman who had given birth to me. Mama Beatrice stood near the foyer archway, clutching her handbag with white knuckles. She looked small and frail, stripped of her entourage and her delusions. She was waiting for the final blow. She expected me to toss her onto the street with nothing but the clothes on her back, just as Preston had threatened to do hours ago. She expected the homeless shelter or the state-run facility near the sewage plant. I walked over to the sideboard and picked up a thick, glossy brochure that I had placed there earlier. I walked toward her, stopping just outside of touching distance. I held the brochure out. "You are not going to the street, Mama," I said, my voice devoid of the anger that had fueled me earlier. "That would be too easy. It would make you a martyr, and I will not give you the satisfaction of playing the victim to your bridge club friends. I am not sending you to the poorhouse. I am sending you here." She took the brochure with trembling hands. Her eyes widened as she read the gold-embossed letters on the cover. The Kensington Estates. It was the most exclusive assisted living facility in the state. It was a place where old money went to fade away in comfort. "It is fully paid for," I continued. "A private suite with a garden view. 3 gourmet meals a day prepared by actual chefs. Housekeeping. Laundry service. A library. It is a 5-star resort, Beatrice. You will have the life of luxury you always pretended to have. You will never have to lift a finger again." Beatrice looked up at me, confusion warring with relief in her watery eyes. "Aaliyah, I do not understand. After everything I did, you are paying for this. You are saving me." I shook my head slowly, cutting off her hope before it could take root. "Do not mistake this for kindness, Mama. This is not a gift. It is a quarantine. You are going there because I need to make sure you never hurt anyone again. The bill is paid in full for the rest of your life, but there are conditions. Strict legal conditions that I have already signed into effect with the administration." I took a step closer, my shadow falling over her. "You will have no access to liquid assets, no cash, no credit cards, no checkbook. Your needs will be met, but you will never hold a dollar in your hand again. You will have no power to buy affection or bribe people to like you. And most importantly, you will have no visitors." Her face fell, the brief flicker of relief replaced by a dawn of horror. "What do you mean, no visitors?" "I mean them," I said, pointing toward the closed front door. "Preston, Bianca, Coco. I have placed them on the permanent exclusion list. They are barred from entering the property. They cannot call you, and they cannot visit you." "But they are my children," she whispered, a tear sliding down her cheek. "They are leeches, Beatrice," I replied coldly. "They only ever loved you for what you could give them. Since you have nothing left to give, I am doing you a favor. I am sparing you the pain of waiting for visits that will never come. You wanted to be a queen high above everyone else. Now you have your wish. You will live in a castle surrounded by servants with every luxury money can buy. But you will be alone. You will eat your gourmet meals in silence. You will sit in your beautiful garden with no one to talk to. You will have the rest of your life to sit in that expensive room and think about the family you destroyed." Marcus stepped forward, offering her his arm. "The car is waiting, Mrs. Jenkins." She looked at me one last time, pleading silently for a different ending. But I had nothing left to say. I watched as she took Marcus' arm and allowed herself to be led away, walking out of the house she had lost and into the gilded cage I had built for her. It was the most merciful punishment I could imagine, and the most devastating. She would live in comfort, but she would die in solitude. The heavy oak front door slammed shut behind them with a finality that echoed like a tomb ceiling. My family, who had spent years walking through that door like they owned the world, now found themselves standing on the cold concrete of the driveway, shivering in the night air. But the silence of the suburbs did not last long. Before Preston could even straighten his suit jacket or scream another threat at the closed door, the night exploded with light. Red and blue strobe lights cut through the darkness, blinding them. The driveway was not empty. It was filled with 3 squad cars and 2 unmarked black sedans. The police had not been called by the neighbors. They had been called by me. I watched from the high window of the library as Preston shielded his eyes, his arrogance instantly replaced by the primal fear of a hunted animal. Officers in tactical vests swarmed the driveway. They did not ask questions. They moved with the certainty of men who had seen the evidence. Preston Jenkins, a voice boomed over a loudspeaker. "Put your hands in the air. You are under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny." Preston tried to run. It was a pathetic attempt, a stumble really toward the hedges, but 2 officers were on him in seconds. They slammed him against the hood of his own leased Porsche, the metal groaning under the impact. I saw the cold steel of handcuffs snap around his wrists. He was screaming, shouting that it was a mistake, that he knew the mayor, that his lawyer would have their badges. But nobody was listening. An agent in a windbreaker stepped forward holding a tablet that I knew contained the forensic audit I had emailed to the district attorney exactly 30 minutes ago. Preston was shoved into the back of a squad car, his face pressed against the glass, looking back at the house he would never enter again. While the police were busy with Preston, Coco saw her opening. She thought the flashing lights were a distraction she could use. She hitched up her skirt and bolted toward the side gate, intending to slip through the neighbor's yard and disappear into the night. She made it 10 yards before a heavy black SUV that had been parked quietly in the shadows roared to life, blocking her path. 2 men stepped out. They were not police. They wore expensive suits that did not fit quite right, and they moved with a heavy, menacing grace. They were Big T's collectors. They had been tracking her phone, waiting for her to leave the safety of the house. Coco froze her breath, catching in her throat. One of the men smiled a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Hello, princess," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp air. "Big T has been worried about you. He thinks it is time we discuss that payment plan." Coco screamed, but the sound was cut short as they guided her firmly into the back seat of the SUV. There were no Miranda rights for her, no phone call to a lawyer. She had played a dangerous game with dangerous men, and now the bill was due. The SUV pulled away, disappearing into the darkness just as fast as it had arrived. That left Bianca. She stood alone in the center of the driveway, watching her husband being driven away in handcuffs and her sister being taken by loan sharks. She looked around wildly, waiting for someone to tell her what to do. But there was no one. The police cars drove off, the sirens fading into the distance. The black SUV was gone. The front door of this mansion remained firmly shut, the lights inside warm and inviting, but forever out of reach. She collapsed onto the asphalt, her expensive designer dress tearing on the rough stone. She had no car keys because the repo men had taken her vehicle an hour ago. She had no wallet because it was inside the house. She had no husband, no sister, and no mother to bail her out. She curled into a ball, sobbing hysterically, her wails echoing off the brick walls of the house she used to rule. She was completely and utterly alone, left with nothing but the cold night and the crushing weight of her own choices. I let the curtain fall back into place, turning away from the window. The show was over. I turned away from the window where the flashing lights of the police cars had finally faded into the darkness. The drama outside was over. Preston was in custody, Coco was in the hands of the underworld, and Bianca was left to face the consequences of her own vanity. Now there was only one loose end left to tie. I walked down the grand staircase, my hand trailing lightly over the polished banister that I used to polish with a rag and lemon oil until my fingers bled. Marcus was waiting by the front door, standing like a sentinel. Beside him stood Mama Beatrice. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. The imposing matriarch who had ruled this house with an iron fist and a sharp tongue had vanished. In her place stood a frail, trembling woman clutching a handbag that contained nothing of value. She looked up as I approached, and I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. It was not anger. It was not even fear anymore. It was a desperate confusion. She truly did not understand how her world had collapsed so completely. She looked at me, searching for the little girl she used to ignore, searching for a trace of the daughter who used to beg for her affection. But that daughter was gone. I looked at her and waited for the familiar surge of hatred to rise in my chest. I waited for the anger, for the desire to scream at her for all the years of neglect and abuse. But it did not come. Instead, I felt a cold, hollow ache. It was pity. I pitied her. She had spent her entire life chasing status and wealth, sacrificing her own flesh and blood on the altar of her ambition, and now she had lost it all. Aaliyah, she whispered, her voice cracking. I am your mother. How can you do this? How can you send me away, to live among strangers? I stopped in front of her, keeping a respectful distance. I did not reach out to hold her hand. I did not offer a tissue for her tears. I stood tall in my white silk suit, a living testament to everything she had failed to control. You made me this way, Mama, I said softly, my voice echoing in the empty hallway. You spent 20 years teaching me a very specific lesson. You showed me every single day that love is conditional. You showed me that family loyalty is a myth. You taught me that the only thing that matters in this world, the only thing that keeps you safe and warm, is the number in your bank account. I took a breath, letting the truth hang in the air between us. You taught me that money is everything. You drilled it into my head when you made me work while my sisters played. You proved it when you sold my happiness to pay for their mistakes. Well, congratulations, Mama. I learned the lesson. I studied hard. I worked harder. And now I have everything. I have the house. I have the empire. I have the power. But because I have everything, I do not have a mother. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open, the words hitting her like physical blows. She finally understood. She had traded her daughter for a lifestyle, and the deal had expired. I nodded to Marcus. Take her. Beatrice let out a low sob, but she did not fight. She knew it was over. She allowed Marcus to guide her out the door and down the steps to the waiting luxury sedan. I did not watch her get in. I did not wait for the car to drive away. I stepped back and took hold of the heavy brass handles of the double doors. I looked out into the night one last time, inhaling the cool, clean air of freedom. Then, with a firm, decisive motion, I pulled the door shut. The latch clicked into place, locking out the past, locking out the pain, and locking out the family that never was. I was alone in the silence, and for the first time in my life, I was home. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind me, sealing the tomb of my childhood forever. I walked down the stone steps, my heels making a crisp, decisive sound on the pavement. The air outside was cool and tasted of pine and impending rain, but to me it smelled like oxygen. It smelled like the first breath after drowning. At the bottom of the driveway, past the spot where Bianca had collapsed and where Preston had been handcuffed, a sleek phantom black Rolls-Royce sat waiting. Its engine was running a low purr that vibrated through the soles of my shoes. This was not a leased car. It was not a loaner. It was mine, paid for in cash, a symbol of the empire I had built while my family was busy mocking me. The chauffeur, a man named James, who had been with me since I founded Vantage Point, stepped out and opened the rear suicide door. He did not look at the house. He did not ask about the police lights fading in the distance. He simply nodded with the quiet professionalism that money buys. "Good evening, Ms. Jenkins," he said. I slid into the back seat, sinking into the hand-stitched leather that felt softer than butter. The interior was a sanctuary of silence and warmth. I placed the bottle of wine I had rescued from the dining room table onto the center console. It was a 1945 Romani Conti, worth more than the car Preston had been driving. I had not let it go to waste on ungrateful palates. James closed the door, shutting out the world. He slid into the driver's seat and looked at me through the rear-view mirror. "Where to tonight, Ms. Jenkins?" "Home to the penthouse." I looked out the tinted window at the dark outline of the mansion. It looked small now. It looked like just a pile of bricks and mortar devoid of the power it had held over me for so long. I turned away, facing the road ahead. "To the airport, James," I said, my voice steady and light. "The private terminal. File a flight plan for Paris." "Paris?" James replied, his tone unchanging. "Very good, ma'am." The car pulled away, gliding over the asphalt, as if it were floating on a cloud. We passed the wrought iron gates and turned onto the main road, leaving the estate behind. I did not look back. There was nothing there for me anymore. No pain, no anger, no regret. Just an empty house and the ghosts of people who had never really known me. I reached for the crystal flute tucked into the car's bar and uncorked the bottle. The rich aroma of black cherry and truffle filled the cabin. I poured a small amount, the dark ruby liquid swirling in the glass, catching the ambient light of the street lamps passing by. I brought the glass to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. It was perfect. Complex, earthy, and deeply satisfying. A smile touched my lips. It was not the cold predator smile I had worn in the dining room. It was a genuine smile, a smile of relief. I had survived. I had endured the fire, and I had walked out of the ashes, not just alive, but reborn. The city lights of Atlanta began to twinkle in the distance, a sea of stars that belonged to me. I leaned back against the headrest, closing my eyes as the car accelerated toward the horizon. The game was over. I had won. And as the smooth jazz played softly through the speakers, a final thought settled in my mind, a truth as clear and sharp as a diamond. They say that revenge is a dish best served cold. But they are wrong. Revenge is not about making them suffer, it is about refusing to let their darkness dim your light. The best revenge is not their destruction, it is your own absolute unapologetic happiness. And my life was just beginning. This story teaches us that your worth is never defined by how others treat you, even if those people are your own family. Aaliyah proves that true power lies in silence and resilience, not in noise and arrogance. While they mocked her, she was building an empire, showing that the best revenge is not pettiness, but massive, undeniable success. It is a reminder to cut ties with toxic people who drain your spirit and to focus entirely on your own growth. If you enjoyed seeing the underdog win, please like and subscribe for more satisfying stories of justice.